The Senate considering a number of amendments to that legislation. Majority Leader Reid yesterday introduced the first of several parts of the President Obama's jobs plan. The Senate's coming in now, and we'll take you there to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I just have a short presentation to make regarding trade adjustment assistance, which of course is legislation that was passed through the Senate not too long ago, and there was a long debate, an important debate about trade adjustment assistance, which is basically a program that we've had in place for decades that recognizes that sometimes workers and companies are caught in a position where, because of unfair trade and unfair competition, that they're left without, not only without a job, but sometimes without a prospect of retaining their position in a particular trade or work that they've done for many years. And so what trade adjustment assistance allows us to do is to provide some help for that worker, for that company, so we can retrain folks for the jobs of the future, or so that that worker can be retrained and adjust to changes in the economy. And in particular today, I rise in opposition to amendment number 740, which would eliminate funding for trade adjustment assistance for firms. We provide it for workers, but there's also a part of the legislation, and part of the act, I should say, that provides help to firms. U.S. trade policy should, I believe, work in the best interests of the American people, and especially American workers and American companies. And of course, as a senator from Pennsylvania, I want that policy to work for our workers in Pennsylvania and our companies. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Past trade deals have sent jobs overseas, and several administrations have not done enough to crack down on China's unfair trade policies. Our workers and our companies need safeguards against employment disruptions caused by our trade policies, or sometimes caused by our lack of a trade policy. And that's one of the reasons why trade adjustment assistance is so important, that we extended it as we have to help workers and the companies that they work for deal with the repercussions of bad trade deals and unfair competition, unfair trade that our workers are impacted by. So now there's an effort by this amendment to somehow change the dynamic as it relates to firms. I know that in Pennsylvania, in calendar year 2010, 51 companies in our state were accepted into the program. So 51 individual companies accepted into the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program to help those companies rebound, to recover from the ravages of international trade. Supporting these firms as they work to better compete against foreign imports will help protect the jobs of the workers in those firms, and I've worked to ensure that the TAA program is re-extended, including this help that we provide for individual firms. The legislation that was recently passed maintains trade adjustment assistance for firms, but returns funding authorization to its pre-2009 levels. And I think this is a critically important point to make. Maybe the best evidence, though, of what's happened is evidence from individual states, but more particularly individual companies. Mr. President, I would ask consent that a news article that is dated Tuesday, June 21st, 2011, from the Bethlehem Express-Times be made part of the record.
Without objection.
This article talks about a visit that I made to a chemical manufacturing plant, and the pertinent part of this article speaks volumes about why trade adjustment assistance is so important for firms. I'm quoting here from a statement made by a gentleman who heads the Manufacturing Resource Center in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Jack Funder. Here's a summary, I should say, of what he said. The article says, and I quote, "Funders said that with technical and financial assistance provided by TAA, the manufacturing industry is able to innovate and better prepare itself for a successful future." So that's someone who's on the ground every day working on manufacturing issues in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to the impact of trade adjustment assistance for a firm, and in particular for this firm. Another part of the article talks about one of the vice presidents at the company that I visited, Puritan Products. Their senior vice president, Thomas Sterner, believes it's, quote, "absolutely," unquote, important for a manufacturing company of Puritan Products size to receive government funding in this economic climate. And I'm quoting here from the article, the last line of the article. "We don't have the funds internally to do some of the things, so getting some government support certainly helps our cause." That's one company, and the leadership of one company, telling us in a very concise way why trade adjustment assistance for firms is vitally needed. So I know we're going to have debates about this issue that will be ongoing even after passage of the legislation. But I rise in opposition to Senator McCain's amendment, number 740, and would urge all members of the Senate to continue to support not just trade adjustment assistance for workers, but trade adjustment assistance for firms as well, especially in this very difficult economy. Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
It's very clear that my Republican colleagues are making their values very clear to the American people. They like to say that they're against tax increases, but they're trying to impose a major tax increase on the middle class while blocking our effort to ask millionaires to pay their fair share. On the bill that's before the Senate today, I started last night, the education first responders legislation, here's what millionaires are being asked to pay: 1/2 of 1% surtax. Whatever millionaires are paying today, we're asking them to pay 1/2 of 1% to allow 400,000 teachers and first responders to keep their jobs or to get their jobs back. This bill that we're advancing would, as I've indicated, save or create 400,000 jobs for some people who are important to us in our communities: teachers, firefighters, police officers. The funny thing about this is that the American people agree with us overwhelmingly, including Republicans. A CNN poll recently released, within the last 24 hours to be exact, showed that 76% of the American people and 56% of the Republicans supported our effort to ask millionaires to pay their fair share. I have a one-track mind. It's really hard for me to talk while I'm being tickled on the side, so. So, as I repeat, at the same time Republicans are blocking an extension of the payroll tax credit. They're trying to raise taxes on the middle class. Republicans used to support the payroll tax before they decided they didn't like it. But I guess they don't like it now because we were the ones that proposed it. We have a different view. We think we should be focused on the middle class, not millionaires. We believe we should cut taxes for middle class, and with 14 million Americans unemployed, we think it's reasonable to ask millionaires to pay their fair share in order to create jobs and to get our economy moving again. So I hope Republicans join us. As you know, there's a big debate taking place in Las Vegas with the Republicans tonight. I want to say just a word about what we already learned about what's going on in Nevada. Nevada has the highest foreclosure rate in America, and it has for almost 3 years. And here's what Mitt Romney said. He would just let them hit rock bottom. I don't know what's more graphic than that in how we have different views of what the world should be like than our Republican friends. Yes.
38 attorney generals are calling for a vote yes on Richard Cordray's nomination to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Will we get a vote or at least a test vote?
I'm wondering where the other 12 states are. We believe this is a very important job, and it's really unfortunate that we have this obstructionism, but it happens a lot. This is what's been going on now, this whole Congress. Elizabeth Warren laid out what this agency should be, this division in Treasury, and she did a wonderful job. People in America know Elizabeth Warren because she stands up for the consumer, and that's what those 38 attorney generals are doing.
You said yesterday that you decided on what the next jobs revision is for.
Yes, what I said yesterday is that I was going to work with my caucus to find out what we're going to move to next. As I indicated, we're going to take pieces of the President's jobs bill. Right now, we're on teachers, first responders. And as soon as we finish on teachers, we'll move to the next issue. We've focused on 3 additional things, and I think it's better for, at least from my perspective, that we don't mix things up. But we have other things we're going to move to, but I think today is not the time to announce that. Pardon me?
Will you try to bring that bill to the floor this week, this first piece, for a vote?
Yeah, well, I started the process last night, and I think it would be really important that the Republicans work with us to set up a vote on that this week.
Senator, do you have a more concrete idea of when you'll file cloture on the jobs bill?
No. No, we have a number of different alternatives, and what would be unique is that if we could work together to set up a series of votes. I hope we can do that. I hope we can do that with these amendments we have on the appropriation bills and finish this week on a high note.
Are you anticipating that vote take place?
Pardon me?
Senator Harkin and NZ are able to move a reauthorization of No Child Left Behind out of committee this week. Would you, or when would you be able to make time on it?
Senator Harkin made a presentation to the caucus today, and I complimented him when he finished. What they're doing with the ESA bill is how committee should work. We all know that Mike Enzi is a good person to work with. He and Harkin have what they hope will be a bipartisan bill that will be reported out of the committee in the near future. Once they do that, I'll do my utmost to find floor time to do that.
Senator, are you going to insist that the vote on the jobs bill take place before the Senate goes home for recess?
I'm not insisting on anything today. I'm trying to work together and just kind of get along. Yes.
I've heard of page 999, proposals getting less traction these days. I just wondered, from your perspective, is that something that might be workable?
I heard a presentation on that this morning, and there are parts of it that make sense, parts of it that don't. But with taxes, you have to make sure that it makes sense. What people don't understand is that Mr. Keene has not only the 999, but he also has a follow-up, some kind of a flat tax. And when you get to that, it creates a number of problems when you complicate it with what he's already done. So, in short, I think it's something we've just started learning about, and it would be very difficult to put your arms around what he suggested in a few little sound bites in debates. We know that there are a number of senators talking about tax reform. There's the super committee, as we know, is looking at some way to do some good things with taxes, and we have Senator, at least on my side of the aisle, we have Senator Baucus and Widener also talking about tax reform. So I think Keene raising this as an issue. Look, I understand the frustration of the American people. Our tax system is broken and needs to be fixed. But whether it needs to be fixed that way, it leaves some concern as to how we would implement that.
Senator Reid, on the education money in this provision, will all of that money be going toward teacher salaries? Will any of it be going toward infrastructure of schools, school supplies, iPads, that sort of thing?
The money that is set forth in this bill is such that a state, we have a few states that haven't laid anyone off. They still get a proportionate share of this money based on the number of children they have in their state. So it would be up to the states to determine what they do with that money, and really any education, as long as it's focused on teachers. Okay.
You're going to vote on Bryson?
Question. It might have been the defense authorization.
I heard your question, but I tried to ignore it. It was not on that. The defense bill, right now, as you know from the discussion we had on the floor, there's some really good discussion today, and has been for the last few days, actually the last couple of weeks, dealing with the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee, dealing with that provision in the bill dealing with detainees. They're working on that. Significant progress is being made. As I indicated on the floor today, we've been stymied from doing things all year. The defense bill, I've always had my mind on it. I've had my eye on it. We're going to move to that before the year's out. As a definite time, I don't know.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I'd ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd ask consent to speak for up to 15 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, on November 18, exactly a month from now, the current law that permits the funding of the government will expire. Something will have to be enacted in its place, since it's clear to all of us, I believe, that we will not have passed and sent to the President all of the appropriations bills by that time. The normal procedure for enacting funding bills is for them to originate in the House of Representatives and be passed there. Then they come to the Senate for consideration and get passed here. I come to the floor today to urge that before the expiration of the current continuing resolution, that is before November 18, that the House enact and send to the Senate a funding bill which extends to the end of the current fiscal year, which extends funding to the end of the current fiscal year, that is September 30th of 2012. My simple point is that, in my view, it's irresponsible for us to continue funding the government just a few weeks at a time. Already this year, we experienced a near shutdown of the federal government in April, a near default on the country's debt in August, a partial shutdown of the Federal Aviation Administration in August, and another near shutdown of the federal government 3 weeks ago because of a dispute over disaster funding. These repeated perils of Pauline scenarios have understandably shaken the confidence of Americans about their government, and more particularly about this Congress. This government-generated uncertainty also has real economic consequences. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke said, and I quote, "The negotiations that took place over the summer disrupted financial markets and probably the economy as well, and similar events in the future could, over time, seriously jeopardize the willingness of investors around the world to hold U.S. financial assets or to make direct investments in job-creating U.S. businesses," end quote. So these are self-inflicted wounds that the economy can ill afford, and reducing the risk of them occurring in the future would provide a modicum of certainty to businesses in this country and throughout the world. Congress can readily eliminate the risk of a government shutdown during this fiscal year simply by enacting a full-year continuing resolution. The sad reality is that in recent years, the Congress has more and more relied on short-term funding bills, or so-called continuing resolutions, to keep the government functioning while we try to reach agreement on appropriations levels. So some would ask, why are the circumstances different this year? They are different for the simple reason that we have already settled on the level of funding for the government. The Budget Control Act of 2011 that was enacted in August set the spending levels for the federal government for this year and for each of the next 9 years. These spending levels were passed with large bipartisan majorities in both chambers. Here in the Senate, the vote was 74 to 26. Therefore, enacting a full-year continuing resolution that sets federal spending at that level should not be controversial. We should not have to rehash the debate on spending levels every few months. Adopting a full-year continuing resolution would free up valuable time in Congress to work on other legislation intended to create jobs and to help the economy. A full-year continuing resolution also allows the government to operate more efficiently than it can under a series of short-term continuing resolutions. Short-term continuing resolutions make it difficult for federal agencies to enter into construction contracts, such as to build or repair roads, or to enter into long-term supply contracts that are often less expensive than short-term supply contracts. In other words, short-term continuing resolutions delay critical projects and increase the overall cost to taxpayers. Adopting a full-year continuing resolution would address both of these problems. It's clear that passing a long-term continuing resolution does nothing to preclude Congress from going ahead and passing individual appropriations bills as they are agreed upon. Stan Collender, a respected budget expert, has written about this, and he said, I quote from an article he wrote, he said, if the tried and true procedure is used, the CR, that is the continuing resolution, will simply stop applying to the departments and agencies when the separate appropriation is signed. In appropriations speak, those covered by the individual spending bill will, quote, disengage, end quote, from the CR. So the only argument that I've heard against passing a continuing resolution for the rest of the year is the argument that doing so will take away the pressure on the appropriations committees and the Congress to pass the remaining appropriations bills. That's essentially an argument to force those of us in Congress to do what we ought to do, that is, to pass appropriations bills. In order to do our basic job, do we need to subject the rest of the government and the country to a series of threatened shutdowns? And especially, do we need to do that at a time when we have already agreed on spending levels? I question this argument. It seems to me that both parties, Democrats and Republicans, and particularly the appropriators, both in the House and Senate, have substantial incentive to reach agreement and pass appropriations bills, whether a year-long continuing resolution has been adopted or not. And if it were true that passing a year-long continuing resolution would lessen the incentive to complete action on appropriations bills, then so be it. To my mind, the benefit from eliminating the threat of a series of government shutdowns far outweighs any disadvantage that might result from failure to pass full appropriations bills. So to me, the conclusions are clear. First, we have already, as a Congress, agreed on the spending levels for the current fiscal year. Second, we should make every effort to pass all the appropriations bills reflecting those spending levels as soon as possible. And third, that while we're making that effort to pass the appropriations bills, the responsible course is to pass a continuing resolution that extends to the end of the fiscal year. Here's a chance for us to provide at least a modest degree of predictability for the remaining 11 months of this current fiscal year. I believe we owe it to the American people to do just that. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Alabama.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Americans have a right to know how their government is spending their money. If Congress were more open and honest about where their tax dollars were going, I think they would be shocked by what they would see. It's even worse than people think. I hate to say it. My commitment as ranking member of the Budget Committee is to fight for honest budget practices. I've joined with Senator Olympia Snowe to introduce the Honest Budget Act, stripping away some of the most outrageous gimmicks that are being used in Congress to advance spending beyond our limits. In fact, I'll be filing an amendment today to stop the use of a gimmick called chimps. And one of the very bills is before us this week. And we'll explain that as we go forward, how that leads to improper increases in spending. President Obama is taking his bus tour around the country, riding in his taxpayer-funded million-dollar campaign bus, really, telling people that we must raise taxes to prevent drastic cuts in federal spending. What the President doesn't say is just how much spending has increased in just the past few years, including through a number of gimmicks, and just how much of that money is being improperly spent and wasted. Indeed, since the President has taken office the first 2 years, we saw a 24% increase in non-defense, non-war, discretionary spending. Not Social Security, not Medicare, but discretionary spending went up 24% at a time when this country has never faced larger deficits. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this fiscal year, Washington set new spending levels this year, despite our debt. $3.6 trillion went out the door, and $1.3 trillion of that was borrowed. We spent not less, but more than last year, a 4.2% increase, when we don't have the money. So my challenge to the President is this. During your next speech, I guess these official remarks you're making, but they look political to me, before you call for higher taxes on American people, would you be able to look them in the eye and tell them that you've cleaned up spending here? Washington is not wasting their money? Would you be able to look them in the eye and tell them their money is being spent wisely and effectively with strict oversight? Would you be able to look them in the eye and tell them that you are reducing spending, not increasing it? So I fear the answer is no. I fear that any increase in tax rates will amount to nothing more than a bailout for the big spenders here, and an incentive to continue business as usual, an excuse to avoid the hard choices that are being made by families all over America when their income is down, by cities and counties and states all over this country making the kind of tough choices that eventually will help them to be a more productive institution for the taxpayers. So let's consider the situation here in Congress. The Senate Democratic majority hasn't had a budget plan for over 900 days. Indeed, Sunday was the 900th day this Congress has gone without a budget. The Republican House has produced a really historic, effective budget that would change the debt trajectory of our country in a positive way. It wouldn't do everything that needs to be done, but it was a significant, positive, historic step. The Senate, nothing. It's hard to remove waste from a budget when you don't even put together a budget plan. We should bring these spending appropriations bills that we have on the floor now through the regular order, one at a time, not three at a time, trying to find savings in each and every one of them, every place we can. We owe it to the people who send us the tax money that we disperse up here. Cramming 3 bills through in one is no way to run this government. We, I suppose, are supposed to say thanks to the Majority Leader Reid for allowing us to have some amendments on this bill. These, instead of, because we've got only three appropriation bills in one rather than all of them in a super omnibus as we've been having. But there is time to move each bill through the Congress. Our leadership would tell us there's not. We haven't done much at all year. We could have passed a budget, and we could have been moving appropriation bills long before now, one at a time, brought forth on the full amendment process, under strict scrutiny, with every possible effort to see what we can do to bring in fulfill our responsibilities without running up the debt. So I would ask, how can my friends on the other side of the aisle ask anyone to pay more in taxes when they aren't even willing to comply with the Budget Control Act and produce a budget plan in the regular order? Washington asking for more tax revenue is like an alcoholic asking for more cash before a trip to the liquor store. Even if the alcoholic asked a millionaire for the cash, it doesn't change the fact that the money is not being wisely used. For example, just a few weeks ago, we learned that lawyers at the Department of Justice went to a conference where they were billed $16 apiece for muffins. And we all know about the $500 million loan to the now bankrupt Solyndra, yet another big business ally of the White House. President Obama has coined the term the Buffett rule in his push to raise taxes. This rule relies on a little sleight of hand since Buffett pays mostly a capital gains tax. The upper brackets, as we all know, pay the highest income tax rates, and that's how our system works. But this debate about taxes is a little premature. That's why I'd like to suggest something called the Solyndra rule. Under this rule, before any proposals are offered to raise any taxes, we first put an end to wasteful and inappropriate spending in Washington. Until we do, raising tax rates only funds Washington's continuing abuse of all American taxpayers. But the waste is not limited to headline-grabbing controversies. It's pervasive throughout, I'm afraid, virtually every aspect of our government. The food stamp program, a popular program, the SNAP they call it now, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is the largest item in the agricultural budget, I think by far. Spending on food stamps, get this, has increased 300% in just 10 years. It's nearly doubled since President Obama took office. And in the appropriations bill before us this week, the Democratic majority here would propose to make that 300% increase a 350% increase. The bill would increase SNAP spending by 14% over last year. Again, even more. 11 million more Americans are on food stamps now than when the President took office. The size of the benefit has increased 31% since 2008. When the food stamp program was expanded nationally in the 1970s, food stamps were used by 2% of the population. At the beginning of the last decade, they were used by 6% of the population. Today, that figure has risen to 13%, 1 in 8 Americans. This seven-fold increase in food stamp usage demands honest examination. It's time to look under the hood of this program. What is going on? A recent article in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported that Wisconsin food stamp recipients routinely sell their benefit cards on Facebook. The investigation also found that, quote, prosecutors have simply stopped prosecuting the vast majority of food stamp fraud cases in virtually all counties, including the one with the most recipients, Milwaukee, close quote. In Michigan, a $2 million lottery winner continued to receive food stamps because his winnings were counted as an asset and not income. I kid you not. Apparently he asked about it. They said, well, it's not income, it's an asset. You don't count assets now, but you're supposed to. Eligibility standards have been loosened across the board. People are getting food stamps that do not fit the program's requirements. We've always had a problem with this program. As a federal prosecutor, United States attorney, and assistant United States attorney for almost 15 years, I personally prosecuted fraud in the food stamp program. They were used as currency among drug dealers in many areas of our country. There are all kinds of problems, and we've done little or nothing about it. Nothing about it, really. One glaring example is something called categorical eligibility. What this means basically is that even if your level of wealth ordinarily would make you ineligible for benefits, you will still get food stamps simply because you used another government program. So if you used another program, you qualify for that. Apparently, they automatically make you eligible for food stamps. For example, in one state, they've included information for a pregnancy hotline. In other words, if you qualify for the pregnancy or use a pregnancy hotline, apparently you qualify for food stamps. You automatically become eligible for them. In many states, all that is needed to become food stamp eligible is to be mailed a brochure by the government. And again, regardless of the assets the individual might have. So the amendment I'm filing today will eliminate categorical eligibility. Only those people who are eligible under food stamp requirements would be eligible to receive the benefits. It's not too much to ask of an applicant for a benefit worth thousands of dollars to file an application under oath that assures that the person is really in need and qualifies under the law to receive a benefit paid for by the taxpayers of this country? Is that too much to ask? Well, the second amendment I'll be offering today would set next year's food stamp funding at the same level that the House of Representatives has passed. The proposed $9 billion increase would amount to a decrease would amount to nearly $100 billion in savings over the next 10 years in the food stamp program. $100 billion savings, assuming no further increases in the program. By the way, I just met an Alabamian who's familiar with the Alabama harbors and the waterway system. That program totally, nationally, comes in at less than $500 million. We've had 3 ships run aground in recent months because we didn't have the money to do the dredging, a few $1 million. This is talking about saving $10 billion, $9 billion a year. $1 billion is 1,000 million, $9,000 million. When just a few $100 million would fix our waterways and harbors all over the country. $500 million would fund double the current waterway bill in the entire United States of America. So surely members on both sides of the aisle can agree that we need to be focused on making programs more effective before we increase them beyond, on this program, beyond its 100% growth already. So the greatest danger our economy faces, in my opinion, and I believe that of experts that we've heard testify at the Budget Committee, is the debt, the cloud, the that the debt places over our economy is endangering it. It's costing economic growth. It's costing jobs this very minute. And the first thing we need to do is see if we can't reduce that debt without raising more taxes on a weakened economy. That's the first responsibility, I believe. So under the President's leadership, the deficits have increased dramatically each year. No one can deny this. Meanwhile, the President's stimulus plans have resulted in not less but more unemployment, actually. To restore prosperity, we need an honest, concrete budget plan that restores confidence, ends waste, creates private sector growth. Such a plan must reduce the deficit. The experts tell us by at least $4 trillion over the next 10 years. But the plans we have in place today, and if our committee of 12 reaches the agreement that they've been asked to reach, they would, in effect, accomplish a $2.4 trillion reduction in our deficit our deficit increase, not our debt. It would reduce the projected deficit increase by $2.4 trillion. But the experts tell us we need to reduce it by $4 trillion. Bipartisan. Mr. Erskine Bowles, appointed by President Obama to head his own debt commission, said $4 trillion. Mr. Zandy, who's been advising the Democratic majority, testified in the Budget Committee a couple of weeks ago. You've got to have $4 trillion in reduced spending and reduced deficits. So we're not getting there. We're not doing the things necessary. And I truly believe, and I hate to say it, that we are still in denial in this Congress. We haven't realized how serious the threat is. Some of the things we're going to have to do. Business as usual cannot continue. And I hope that as we go forward with this legislation, we'll get some votes that can actually begin to reduce spending in a number of areas. I hope during the course of this debate, the people of the United States will begin to focus on what's happening in their Congress and hold us all accountable. Make sure that we're managing your money effectively. And if we do that, we might surprise ourselves. Indeed, we would surprise ourselves, is how much that could be accomplished in a decade of sustained, smart effort to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, to focus on our spending that's going to, that can be contained. The defense budget has got to tighten its budget. The Defense Department, no doubt about it, but you can't balance the budget all on the Defense Department. Their budget makes up less than half of the deficit this year. Our deficit this year will be about $1.3 trillion. The defense budget's about $529 billion. So it's way less than half of it. So we've got to do across the board, and programs that aren't being run well, that are surging out of control, like food stamps, which are the largest, one of the largest expenditures in the entire federal budget, they need to be brought under control. We may not have enough money for the highway bill. It's about $40 billion. We're now spending twice that on food stamps, having tripled it in a decade. So I would just say to my colleagues, we need to get serious about spending. I believe we can do better, and we can surprise ourselves if we make a firm determination to do better, and look forward to offering amendments that will help us get there. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor. The absence of quorum.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum be lifted, the quorum call be lifted.